My name is Susan Wynn, 33 years old. The apartment always smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish, a clean that didn't just look right, it felt right. My life was built the same way: tidy, predictable, balanced. I had spent years constructing a peace that didn't rely on anyone else's stability but my own. A senior analyst at a Chicago investment firm, two monitors on my desk, a calendar color-coded to the minute, and a condo that never echoed with noise I hadn't planned for. Ethan used to joke that I ran my life like a small, well-funded government. He wasn't wrong, and somehow he loved that about me. When we met, I was all numbers and logic. He was warmth in human form. Where I saw schedules, he saw seasons. Where I heard ticking clocks, he heard songs. He'd left marketing 6 months before we met, tired of pretending his work meant something. Instead, he found peace in small things: cooking, volunteering, fixing what was broken. The contrast between us should have clashed. It didn't. I brought home the income. He brought home the calm. We didn't compete. We completed. At least, that's what I believed before his mother entered every conversation like a storm cloud in designer heels. Margaret Wynn was the kind of woman who spoke like she was writing commandments. Her sentences came with sharp punctuation and judgment hidden in perfume. The first time she met me, she looked me up and down and said, "You must be so busy." It sounded like a compliment. It wasn't. Over the years, her disapproval turned from subtle to surgical. "Ethan always loved my lasagna," she'd say during dinner, eyes darting to my untouched salad. "Don't you ever cook for him?" Or, "That suit looks powerful, Susan, though I do miss seeing a little softness in women these days." Ethan always tried to mediate, to smooth over her edges. "She's just scared of being alone," he'd whisper later, pressing his forehead to mine. But fear isn't an excuse for cruelty, and Margaret didn't want understanding. She wanted control. The breaking point began, ironically, with an invitation. Jeremy, Ethan's younger brother, was getting married at a mountain lodge in Colorado. The whole rustic charm fantasy. Fairy lights, mason jars, a playlist called Forever and Always. We RSVP'd, yes, months in advance. I even bought a dress. Hannah, my sister, had nearly fainted when she heard. "You're taking a weekend off? Mark it in history." But 3 days before the wedding, the universe flipped the script. I woke up at 4 a.m., doubled over in pain, cold sweat, stomach cramping like it was tearing from the inside. Ethan found me on the bathroom floor and didn't hesitate. "Hospital, now." The emergency room smelled like metal and disinfectant. The doctor's words came in fragments: bleeding gastric ulcer, stress-induced, no travel, strict rest. I nodded through the haze. Ethan squeezed my hand. "I'll tell everyone. Don't worry about the wedding. Just get better." I thought that was the end of it. I didn't realize it was just the beginning. By the second day, the pain dulled into a heavy throb. Boredom took its place. I asked Ethan to bring my laptop, promised not to overwork, just something to keep my mind occupied. He hesitated, then agreed. It was nearly noon when the door to my hospital room slammed open. I jumped, nearly pulling out my IV line. Margaret stood there, immaculate in a cream coat and heels far too expensive for hospital floors. Her eyes swept the room, landing on my laptop. "You look fine," she said flatly. "Margaret?" I blinked. "What are you doing here?" She stepped closer, her heels clicking like judgment. "I came to remind you the wedding starts at 2. We expect you there by noon tomorrow." I blinked again, certain I'd misheard. "I'm not allowed to leave. The doctor—" "Said some nonsense about an ulcer," she interrupted. "You're sitting upright, typing. You can travel." "Typing doesn't equal traveling." I closed the laptop carefully. "Margaret, I'm on IV fluids. I can't walk unassisted." She crossed her arms. "You're on a laptop, Susan. If you can manage spreadsheets, you can manage a car ride." "Please lower your voice," I said quietly. "This is a hospital." "Oh, don't give me that sanctimonious tone." Her voice rose, slicing through the air. "You're embarrassing this family. Missing your brother-in-law's wedding. Who does that?" Someone behind the curtain rustled. I took a slow breath. Someone who's under doctor's orders not to leave her bed. Her eyes flared. "No, someone who doesn't care. Someone who uses work and health as excuses." "Excuses?" I whispered. "You think I want to be here?" "I think you want to avoid being seen. You've always been good at that, hiding behind your job, behind that cool little wall of yours." I pressed the nurse call button. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Getting you removed. You're disturbing other patients." A nurse appeared almost immediately, drawn by the tension. "Ma'am, you need to leave," she said sternly. Margaret's nostrils flared. Unbelievable. But she backed toward the door, muttering something about ungrateful women. The door clicked shut behind her like a gavel. I lay there for a long minute, staring at the ceiling tiles. The fluorescent lights hummed softly. I could have called Ethan, could have let him know his mother had stormed into my hospital room like a prosecutor, but I didn't. Because part of me still believed he deserved peace. One weekend of it, at least. I'd survive Margaret's war. I always did. By the time Ethan returned that evening, his eyes were warm, tired. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I'm fine," I lied. He kissed my forehead, smoothed my blanket. "I wish I could stay, but Jeremy needs help with last-minute details. You'll rest, right?" "I'll rest," I said. And I meant it. But rest didn't come easy when your enemy was already rewriting the story. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds like a reluctant apology. I opened my laptop again, tried to drown in work, but her words kept echoing. "If you don't come tomorrow, don't bother coming back into this family." I stared at the glow of the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. And for the first time, I realized it wasn't a threat anymore. It was a prophecy. Because something inside me had already started to change. Quietly, irrevocably. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to shrink for anyone again. The hallway outside our condo had the faint smell of detergent and old coffee, the kind of scent that clings to carpet and memory. Ethan carried my overnight bag and moved slowly beside me, ready to catch me if my legs gave out. They felt like glass, solid enough to stand, but one wrong pressure and everything would splinter. The ulcer pain was dulled by medication, but the ache sat low and heavy, like a warning bell you learn to ignore at your own risk. "Home," Ethan said softly, unlocking the door. He always said it like a blessing. Today, it sounded like a test. The apartment greeted us with tidy surfaces and quiet light. My favorite blanket was folded over the back of the couch. The ginger lemon soup he'd promised was steaming on the stove, citrus and warmth lifting into the air. For a second, I believed it might be fine, that we could step back into the soft rhythm we'd made for ourselves, and the world would show mercy. And then I saw her. Margaret sat at the kitchen table as if she'd been installed there, spine straight, ankles crossed, a porcelain cup near her hand going cold under a pale strip of steam. Beside her, on the table, rested a thick manila envelope, a single object that made the whole room feel off balance. Ethan stiffened. "Mom?" His voice was careful. "You have a key?" "You gave it to me," she said, tone smooth, "when your dishwasher broke last spring." Her gaze slid to me, assessing. "You're upright." "I'm discharged," I said, "not cured." Her mouth twitched, as if she disapproved of the distinction. Ethan moved quickly to help me to the couch, tucking the blanket over my legs, his hands steady, gentle. "Soup in 5, he murmured, and to his mother, "Let's keep this brief." "I intend to." Margaret slid the envelope across the coffee table. It stopped inches from my knees. She didn't touch it again. A judge doesn't touch evidence after it's presented. "What is that?" Ethan asked, though I could tell he already feared the answer. "The next step," she said. I swallowed and looked down. My name stared back in bold print through the envelope window. Susan Wynn. My stomach clenched against the ulcer's raw seam. "Mom," Ethan said softly, a warning threaded through the word. "Don't preface me," she snapped, and then returned to a composed voice. "Susan made a promise. She told me if she failed to show up for Jeremy's wedding, she would step back from this family. I'm here to honor her word." Ethan's face changed. "She said that under duress." "I said it under fluorescent lights," I replied, meeting Margaret's eyes. "After you barged into a hospital room and accused me of lying about internal bleeding." Margaret ignored the correction. "We all have choices. You made yours." "Your version of choice often looks like a trap," I said, my voice even. I was on IV fluids. "You were on a laptop," she countered, as if that dismantled medicine and pain. "If you can type, you can travel." Jeremy's bride asked after you. So did the pastor. Do you know how small it made Ethan look to arrive alone? Ethan inhaled sharply. "I wasn't alone." "You never are," she said, flicking her eyes at me. "You carry this shadow with you wherever you go now. Work first, feelings later. Marriage somewhere after that." Something inside me settled, an alignment like bones finding their sockets. I reached for the envelope. The class made a small sound, a tiny tearing that felt louder than it should. Inside were neatly clipped forms, crisp lines and blank spaces, the bureaucratic choreography of endings. The tab for a pen gleamed like a dare. Ethan moved closer to me. Susan. I don't like her methods, I said, eyes still on the papers, but I have always appreciated clarity. I picked up the pen from the table. So, let's be clear. Margaret leaned back, satisfied, certain of the narrative she was tightening around my throat. I signed my name once, then again where the flags indicated. The curves of my signature were clean and deliberate, a boundary drawn without shaking. The pen clicked softly as I capped it. I slid the stack forward. There, I said, I kept my word. Now Ethan needs to keep his. He blinked. What? Words, I said, turning to him. Not signatures, not deferrals, not let's talk later to keep the peace. I'm too tired and too honest for that. I won't drag this another week so you can manage everyone's feelings. We stand at the table we've set. Margaret folded her arms, victory brightening her posture. You don't have to think about this, she told him, maternal authority ringing in the room. You know what's right. Ethan's jaw tightened. I know what love is, he said. And love, she said quickly, does not make a son into a servant. A flash of heat ran up my spine, sharp enough to steal my breath. He isn't a servant, I said, keeping my voice level. He's my partner. You don't cook, she said. You don't slow down. You keep your job on a throne and expect him to orbit your schedule. That's not partnership, that's convenience. Ethan turned to me, torn open by years of triangulation, and I saw it. The little boy who learned to soothe his mother's weather, the grown man who'd been taught peace, meant pleasing whoever was loudest in the room. It wasn't weakness, it was muscle memory. Enough, he said to his mother, but it came out hushed, uncertain. No, I said, sitting up despite the pull in my abdomen. The pain steadied my focus. Let's stop pretending the story is anything but what it is. Margaret raised an eyebrow. And what story is that? The one where you call me a parasite while eating from my table, I said simply. The room went very still. The refrigerator hummed. A car horn pealed far below on the street and faded like a memory. Margaret's expression cracked. What does that mean? It means, I replied, not unkindly, that when Ethan left marketing, he left on purpose. He was burnt out. He found a life that made him steady. And I said yes to it, eyes open. For the past 3 years, I've paid the rent, the utilities, the groceries, the gifts you bragged about to your friends, the checks you thought were from him. That was me. Color drained from her face, not all at once, but in small defeats. She reached for the porcelain cup and didn't lift it. That's not possible, she said weakly. He sends money every month for my HOA, for gas. Because I put a line in our budget called Mom. The words were gentle, factual. When your heat failed last winter, I paid the bill. When your overdraft hit twice this spring, I covered it. The rehearsal dinner deposit for Jeremy? That charge cleared on my card because Ethan asked, and I said yes, quietly. Ethan closed his eyes, shame moving across his face like a cloud. I was going to tell you, he said to his mother. I just didn't want to embarrass you. Margaret's hands, once the steadiest thing in any room, trembled against the china. I didn't know, she whispered, and I couldn't tell if it was admission or defense. That was the point, I said. I never wanted you in my debt. I wanted you off my back. She stared at the envelope again, at my name printed so confidently on a future she'd plotted for me. Why didn't you say something sooner? Because gratitude shouldn't be a leash, I answered, and because telling you wouldn't have changed how you measured my worth. You decided who I was before you met me. Ethan's voice was soft. Mom, we've tried. Boundaries, explanations, invitations. You don't hear them unless you're losing something, and even then you call it betrayal. She looked at him then, really looked, and I saw fear there for the first time, Kanan uncostumed. You're going to cut me off. I'm going to set boundaries, he said, steady now. What you do with them is up to you. Margaret's chin lifted like a final defense. You would choose her over your own mother? The old, impossible question. The script she trusted because it had worked on him forever. Ethan met my eyes and then his mother's, and to his credit, he didn't look away from either of us. I'm not choosing against you, he said. I'm choosing with my wife. The sentence hung in the air, simple and seismic. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's music started, a piano practicing scales, wrong notes corrected into right ones. The sound felt appropriate. Margaret stood abruptly, as if motion alone could win the argument. "You'll regret this," she said, but her voice faltered on regret. I exhaled, a slow, careful release. "No more ambushes," I said. "No more keys, no more unannounced arrivals. You want to be in our lives, you do it with respect, or you don't do it at all." She glanced at the door, then back at Ethan, searching for the boy she could still command. He wasn't there. The man in front of her was bruised with history and finally learning how to stand. Her eyes fell to the envelope one last time. "I only wanted what's best for you," she murmured. "Then let us decide what that looks like," he replied. Margaret left without another word. The door clicked shut, this time not like a gavel, but like a lid. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The soup simmered softly, little bubbles rising and bursting against the pot, the ordinary sound of something nourishing itself into readiness. Ethan sat beside me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I'm sorry," he said. "It wasn't performative, it was raw. For not stopping her sooner, for protecting her feelings more than yours, for letting you stand alone in rooms where I should have been beside you." "We were both learning," I said. "You, how to separate love from permission. Me, how to stop being polite to harm." He nodded, eyes glossy. "What now?" I looked at the envelope, the neatly stacked pages that suddenly felt small. "Now we tell the truth all the way through," I said, "and we make a plan that doesn't include surviving your mother." His hand found mine, our fingers threaded like they had 100 times. But something in the grip was different, firmer, decided. In the quiet that followed, I felt it, a future shifting its weight, preparing to land. The next morning, the air in the apartment felt different, lighter in some places, heavier in others, like a storm that had passed but left humidity clinging to every surface. I woke early, made tea, and stared out the window at the city stretching awake. Ethan was still asleep on the couch. He had stayed there half the night, claiming he wanted to give me space. I didn't argue. After what happened, silence felt safer than strategy. Margaret hadn't called. That was the first miracle of the day. The second came around noon, when Ethan walked into the kitchen, hair disheveled, wearing the same shirt from yesterday. He looked human again. No performance, no practiced calm. Just a man who'd seen the cost of indecision. "She'll reach out," he said quietly, pouring himself coffee. "I know. She won't apologize." "I know that too." He nodded once, as though confirming we were reading the same weather report. I spent the rest of the afternoon sorting through bills, not because I needed to, but because clarity steadied me. Every spreadsheet I opened was a reminder of what I'd carried in silence. The rent, the insurance, the mom line item that had become an invisible tax on my peace. I deleted that column first. The cursor blinked in the empty cell like an exhale. When the phone finally buzzed that evening, Ethan's shoulders tensed. "Answer it," I said. He did, and on speaker, Margaret's voice filled the kitchen, brittle but controlled, like glass balanced on a ledge. "I need to come by," she said. "We need to talk." "No," Ethan said calmly. "We said everything yesterday." "I don't want to argue," she insisted. "I want to understand." He hesitated. I placed my hand on his arm. "Let her come," I said. "Understanding requires presence." He looked at me, uncertain, but nodded. "Fine, 10 minutes." It took 15. She arrived wearing the same cream coat, as if it were armor, clutching her bag like a weapon she wasn't sure she wanted to use. When she stepped inside, she didn't look at me, only at Ethan. "Coffee?" I offered. My tone was even, polite, the same one I used in boardrooms before delivering numbers no one wanted to hear. She shook her head. "This isn't social." "Clearly." Her eyes flicked to me, measuring. "You humiliated me yesterday." "I told the truth," I said. "If that humiliated you, it means you already knew it somewhere inside." Ethan stepped between us slightly. "Mom, please." "No," she said sharply. "Let her speak if she wants to. Let's have the truth then." Fine. Truth had been waiting years for its turn. "When I met you," I began, "I wanted to impress you. I thought if I just worked harder, earned more, showed I could build something stable, you'd see me as family. But you didn't want a daughter-in-law. You wanted an assistant who fit your script." Margaret's jaw tightened. "I wanted a wife who valued my son." "I do," I said. "That's why I took on the bills when he left marketing. That's why I supported his choices without resentment. That's why I said nothing when you accused me of using him. I was protecting him from your judgment because I thought that's what love required." She blinked, stunned by the steadiness in my voice. And you think that makes you noble? No, I said. It makes me tired. Ethan's hand found the back of the chair beside him, gripping it like an anchor. Mom, she's right. You've been using me as proof that your sacrifices meant something. You made me your validation project. Margaret turned on him, face flushing. Everything I did for you. I worked 2 jobs after your father left. I kept the lights on, he interrupted softly. I know. But you never stopped reminding me. Every success I had belonged to you, and every choice I made belonged to your approval. That's not love, Mom. That's debt. Her lip trembled, anger collapsing into disbelief. Debt? I raised you. And I'm grateful, he said gently. But gratitude isn't servitude. The room went still. She sank into a chair like her bones had lost instruction. For the first time, I didn't see Margaret the critic or Margaret the commander. I saw a woman built on exhaustion and fear, clutching old versions of family because she didn't trust love to stay without control. You think I wanted to hurt you, she whispered. I just wanted to make sure you didn't forget where you came from. I didn't, Ethan said, but I also know where I'm going, and it can't be backward. I watched her swallow that truth. Not a word, not a sentence, but a whole era ending. She looked at me then, eyes sharp again, defensive. You took my son from me. I shook my head slowly. No, I just stopped standing between you and the mirror. That broke her, not dramatically. No tears, no sobbing, just a quiet crumbling. Her shoulders folded in, and she exhaled through a shaking breath that sounded too small for the space it filled. I don't know who I am without being needed, she said. I wanted to hate her. I didn't, because that sentence, raw, unguarded, was something I understood too well. You're still needed, I said softly, just not in the way you were. You don't have to be the command center anymore. You can just be a mother, if you ever choose to be. She looked up, and for a flicker of a second, I thought she might apologize. But the moment passed like a shadow over water. Instead, she stood. I can't stay, she murmured. Then go, Ethan said gently. But know the door doesn't open the same way it used to. She walked to the threshold, paused, then looked back, not at him, but at me. You win, she said, a brittle smile cracking across her face. This was never a competition, I replied. Everything's a competition to women like you. Her tone was faint, tired, but the words landed with the weight of habit. No, I said quietly, it's survival. She left without closing the door fully. The draft that followed smelled faintly of her perfume and something older. Defeat, maybe. Ethan shut the door gently, locked it, and leaned his head against the wood. His voice was hoarse. I feel like I just watched my mother disappear. Maybe she did, I said. Or maybe she's finally visible for the first time. He turned, eyes red but clear. You were right about her, about all of it. I shook my head. No, I was just done pretending that lies are kindness. We stood there for a while. No words, just the sound of the clock ticking and the faint simmer of the kettle still on low heat. Eventually he reached for me. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For not walking away when it would have been easier. I smiled faintly. It's never been easy. That's how I know it's real. Later, when the evening settled over the city, I found myself looking again at the deleted mom column on my spreadsheet. The space was blank now, but it didn't feel like loss. It felt like air returning to lungs that had forgotten how to breathe freely. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window just once, then quieting as if testing its own restraint. I thought about Margaret's words. You win. Maybe she would never understand that this wasn't victory. It was closure, paid for in patience and small humiliations, and finally, truth. And truth, once spoken aloud, doesn't leave. It stays, echoing softly through rooms that used to hold secrets. The moving truck arrived on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that smelled like wet pavement and new beginnings. Ethan was already outside directing the movers, his sweatshirt streaked with dust, hair tied back. He looked lighter somehow, like he'd been quietly setting himself free one box at a time. Inside, our old apartment felt smaller than I remembered. The furniture seemed to have shrunk in the wake of truth. Every room echoed differently now, not because of emptiness, but because silence had changed shape. It wasn't the kind that hides tension anymore. It was the kind that makes space for peace. I stood by the kitchen counter, running my hand along its cool marble surface, remembering the countless mornings of burnt toast, coffee, and careful avoidance of certain phone calls. This place had witnessed every unspoken battle, every compromise disguised as patience. It had also seen love, quiet and sincere, blooming between two people learning how to build something that wasn't broken by inheritance. Hannah arrived halfway through the move, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a bag of blueberry muffins. "You look like someone who just survived a hostage negotiation," she said, handing me one. "Feels accurate." She sat on a stack of boxes. "So, it's really happening. You're leaving." "Yeah, 2 neighborhoods over. New walls, new light, no ghosts." She grinned. "You sound proud of yourself." "I am," I said, "but not in the way people think. It's not victory, it's clarity." She nodded slowly, the kind of nod that comes from watching someone rebuild themselves one boundary at a time. By afternoon, the apartment was nearly bare. The couch where Ethan and I had shared quiet dinners was gone. The shelf that once held Margaret's holiday gifts, crystal bowls, embroidered napkins, all the little reminders of expectation, stood empty. The only thing left on the counter was a single envelope. Margaret's handwriting was unmistakable, to Susan and Ethan. Ethan walked in, holding a box of dishes. He froze when he saw it. "She came by?" "It was in the mailbox this morning." We stood there for a moment before he opened it. Inside was a folded letter written in neat, slanted cursive. He read silently, eyes moving line by line. When he reached the end, he handed it to me. "I didn't know how much noise I made until the house went quiet. You were right, Susan. I don't know how to love without control. I've spent years mistaking fear for devotion. I thought if I kept my sons close, I could keep life predictable. Now the silence hurts. But maybe that's what truth sounds like at first. I'm sorry for the way I spoke to you. In that hospital, in your home, in every moment I confused pride with care. If you ever want to have dinner, no judgments, no demands, I'll cook. I make a decent lasagna. Margaret." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "Do you believe her?" "I think she believes herself today," Ethan said. "Tomorrow, we'll see." "That's fair." We didn't talk about it again. Some apologies aren't meant to be dissected. They're meant to be observed, like rare weather. 3 weeks later, we moved into a brownstone with a small garden in the back. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. The first night there, we sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, eating takeout straight from cartons. Ethan had dirt under his fingernails from helping a neighbor replant a row of hydrangeas. I had a glass of wine and no spreadsheets open, a miracle in itself. "This feels different," he said. "It should," I replied. "It's the first home we've chosen without guilt." He smiled faintly. "You think she'll call?" "She will," I said. "But this time, you'll answer when you're ready, not when she demands it." He nodded. "I can live with that." The next few months passed quietly. Margaret sent messages on holidays. Short, measured ones. "Merry Christmas. Hope you're both well. No guilt. No questions." Ethan responded politely, sometimes briefly, sometimes not at all. The distance wasn't cruel. It was careful. Jeremy and his new wife had stopped visiting her altogether. Word had spread through the family that Margaret's control had cost her more than she'd realized. By spring, even her friends began pulling away, tired of choosing sides she'd created. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. I felt sad. Because in the end, all she'd ever wanted was relevance. And when she couldn't earn it with love, she tried to secure it with power. One afternoon, I passed by a cafe near my new office and saw her sitting by the window. Alone. A half-eaten croissant on her plate, hands folded, eyes unfocused. I didn't go inside. I just stood there for a minute, watching her reflection against the glass. For the first time, I didn't see an adversary. I saw a woman learning how to sit in her own silence. That night, I told Ethan. He paused mid-stir over the stove. "Do you think she's okay?" "I think she's figuring out who she is without being the center of someone else's story." He smiled faintly. "That makes 2 of us." We ate dinner at the table we'd found at a thrift store, scratched but sturdy, like everything worth keeping. Afterward, I sat by the window, looking out at the small garden below. The soil was dark and rich. Ethan had planted basil, rosemary, and a single lemon tree. I didn't ask why. I just liked that he believed something would grow. When the evening breeze came through the window, carrying the scent of earth and possibility, I realized what had shifted in me. I wasn't waiting for peace anymore. I was practicing it. I wrote Margaret a short note that night. No drama, no analysis, just a line I meant with all the softness I could muster. "Thank you for the lesson. I hope you find what you were fighting for." I didn't expect an answer, and none came. That was okay. Some closures don't arrive in conversation. They arrive in acceptance. As weeks turned to months, our home filled with laughter again. Not the forced kind that hides discomfort, but the genuine kind that rises naturally. Hannah came over often with wine and chaos. Ethan taught a class at the community garden and started painting again. I started leaving work before sunset, letting the world feel bigger than my calendar. One evening, as we watched the last streaks of daylight fade through the kitchen window, Ethan turned to me and said, "You ever think we'd make it here?" I smiled. "No, but maybe that's what makes it beautiful." He reached across the table, his hand finding mine. Outside, the lemon tree caught a small gust of wind and shivered, fragile, rooted, alive. "Some houses," I said softly, "echo long after you leave them." Ethan looked up, eyes reflecting the quiet glow of the evening. "And this one?" "This one," I whispered, "finally feels like peace."